everybody. Welcome to Resistance Live. It's the 14th of July, 2025, and I'm Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. We have to talk about Epstein today because I think, much to the surprise of many folks on the left, what's happened in the last few days has real legs and really serious consequences. It's been kind of wild to watch this whole thing devolve over the weekend. So we got to go through everything that's happened. We had a lot of questions on the Patreon feed this morning about it. So stay tuned for that. It's coming. Plus, we got some other things we have to talk about related to ICE. Okay. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. I was a Wall Street lawyer and a human rights lawyer for 15 years. And now I work in impact and leadership consulting, helping people who want to make a difference in these incredibly difficult times to do so. Today, for our visually challenged viewers, I am wearing a cream-colored mock sleeveless turtleneck. My hair is pulled back. I'm a pink skin, green eyed, dirty blonde haired woman, and I am in front of my bookshelf and my yellow utility cart. And I'm coming to you, as always, from occupied Muncie, Lenape, and Mohican land. Okay. So here's the background on this story for people who didn't follow it. On his way into office and during the campaign last year, Trump repeatedly said that he would make the Epstein files, and particularly the rumored Epstein list of all of Epstein's colleagues and clients, public if he was reelected. Then when he was reelected and Pam Bondi became the attorney general, she made this whole big show of handing out a binder of putative Epstein documents to MAGA and right-wing influencers. And as recently as a few weeks ago, there were claims that the list, so to speak, was going to be released. Then late last week, news broke from the DOJ that there was no such list, or that Pam Bondi saying the list had been on her desk was like maybe not accurate, or that they weren't going to release the list, or they weren't going to release any of the documents that they had. And then Trump took to Truth Social and said, there is no list, but if there was a list, it was created by Obama and Hillary. And this whole scenario appears to have absolutely broken MAGA brains. So people ask me on the Patreon feed, why? Why does this have so many legs? Why is Dan Bongino threatening to quit his position inside the FBI as a result of this? Why is there an ongoing battle between Bongino and Pam Bondi? You know, how is this taking place? Why is Steve Bannon flipping on Trump about this? Why are commentators on the far right questioning whether or not Trump has become the deep state? This has been really wild to watch. So we have to go back in time for a few years to QAnon, all right? And many of you will remember this was the wild conspiracy theory that claimed that there was a cabal of politicians who were engaged in the sexual abuse of children, drinking their blood and the like. And what we learned throughout Trump's first term, as this particular conspiracy theory spread and spread and spread and spread and spread, is that eventually about a third, maybe more, of Trump's base became entrenched with QAnon. So they still have this belief that there is this global conspiracy to molest children, of which Epstein was either the king or a very significant part of. And so now that Trump is apparently covering up what was in the Epstein documents that were collected by the federal government at the time of his arrest, MAGA has decided that this is just a step too far. Now, what's odd about this, of course, that we all can say on our side of the fence, is that everybody who's followed Donald Trump for any window of time knows that Jeffrey Epstein was his best friend for 15 years, that Donald Trump flew on Epstein's jet known as the Lolita Express at least 7 or 8 times from the flight manifests. We know that they partied together routinely in New York and at Mar-a-Lago. There are accusations that never went to trial, that, Trump was seen with young girls at Epstein's mansion and may have engaged in sexual assault of young girls while he was there. All of this is publicly known. But this whole event has really revealed the totality of the bubble in which the MAGA base lives. because some of them, at least, seem to be discovering for the first time that Trump and Epstein were best buddies. And this has caused huge breakdowns. I personally will just tell you that I've been shocked. People like Nick Fuentes, who of course is the right-wing white supremacist founder of the Groyper movement, has disavowed Trump now. I mean, just absolutely shocking stuff that I never would have predicted in a million years over this. And part of this, as we all know, the MAGA base is entrenched in a lot of conspiracy theories about Hillary, about Hunter's laptop, about all sorts of other things. But this particular conspiracy theory, this idea that Trump is out there protecting the children of America, I know the hypocrisy is thick. I know that his actions prove exactly the opposite, particularly for Black and brown children, for LGBTQ children, for trans and non-binary children. I know, okay? But entrenched in this conspiracy theory is the idea that Trump was going to save all of these children from this pedophilia ring. And now Trump's not giving up the goods. And the cracks are not going away. We've had a lot of conversations for a very long time about like Teflon Don and nothing ever sticks to him. This is sticking in really strange ways. People on the far right are calling for Pam Bondi's resignation. Bongino and Kash Patel may be linked at the hip and leaving at the same time over this. And you can bet your bottom dollar that when Bongino gets out and goes back to his podcast, we're going to get a whole earful about all of this. But they seem to be breaking wide open over this. And indeed, when Trump tried to post to deflect from this on Truth Social over the weekend, for the first time ever, he was royally ratioed on his own platform. The last time I looked at it, there were something like 40,000 comments in response to that were like, nope, not going to cut it. Don't gaslight us. You've been telling us for years that, the Epstein files were going to tell us things about the highest ranking people in the world. Why are you doing this to us? Why are you covering this up? It's astonishing, just absolutely astonishing. And I just have to say that with cracks like this happening, not necessarily in people who have voted for him 3 times, but happening in the information influencers, the podcasters that those folks listen to every day, the people who have been like the backbone of like January 6th, right? These are the people that are now turning on Trump. It's wild. And again, nobody knows how this is going to play out in the long run, but I have to say, this is like a very serious rift, and I'm not sure he's coming back from it. Now, what does it mean for the future? That's a really good question, but I'm going to tell you something. I am convinced, and I'm not alone in this, of course, as is apparently obvious to any rational thinking human being, the whole reason why this is happening is because Trump is all over the Epstein docs. We already know that he was in Epstein's phone book, as was his butler at Mar-a-Lago and in New York, as is Melania, right? We know that Ghislaine Maxwell is in prison for 20 years. And apparently, Trump saying there's nothing in the Epstein documents, there's nothing there, nothing happened, this is all rumors, right? But she's in prison for sex trafficking children for 20 years on behalf of Jeffrey Epstein. So a lot of this is just not flying right now. And, it's very clear that what's being covered up is Trump's own participation in Jeffrey Epstein's incredibly violent and foul scheme to predate on teenage girls. There are quotes from Trump about how he loves Jeffrey and how they're friends and they both like beautiful women. He likes them on the younger side, right? We have all sorts of circumstantial evidence here with regard to Trump's involvement. And so the only reason that he has to actually cover it up is to cover up his own involvement and maybe to cover up the involvement of some of his friends. Because let's not forget that, Bill Gates apparently took rides on Epstein's plane, right? Other folks who were very, very wealthy have been, Prince Andrew have been roped into this. Ironically enough, the FBI has just dropped their investigation into Prince Andrew with regard to Epstein. I have questions about who else might be in those documents, including people who may have donated money to Trump's inaugural or otherwise donated to his campaign in big amounts. Okay. So whatever it is that he's covering up is a scandal of epic proportions. And we all know that. All right. Now the question is for us, on our side of the fence, how do we maximize on this? Okay, because it's tearing MAGA apart, and that's an advantage that we should not lose. Okay, so related to this is the fact that Emile Beauvais, who happens to currently be the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, is up for a Third Circuit Court of Appeals judicial nomination. That is a lifetime appointment. He is the reason why dozens of DOJ lifers quit their jobs when he demanded that they drop the Eric Adams case or file false documents in court or tell courts to F off when they were ordering the administration to stop deporting people to third party countries. He's a really awful human being. There is no circumstance under which he should be allowed to have a lifetime appointment to the bench in any capacity. But there's a question now, and it's a very good question to call your MAGA senators and ask about. Was Emile Beauvais involved in any way in deciding not to release the Epstein files? Because that's something that the MAGA senators might have some questions about. And I don't care what side of the fence you're on, you should make that phone call if you were represented by a Republican. You should make that phone call. You should say, I really want to know how you're going to vote on this particular judicial nominee when he may be involved in covering up whatever is in those Epstein documents. What are you going to do about it? We have to leverage every single opportunity that we have. On top of it, we have resolutions now being introduced in the House that are seeking to put on the record by a form of a resolution whether or not politicians in the House should demand that the Epstein files be released. And this is introduced by Democrats. What they're trying to do with this is to further exacerbate the issue. Okay? Because if the MAGA voters will abandon Republicans who do not want the Epstein files released, that's the end of them from a re-election standpoint. Okay. So there are all sorts of ways in which all of this may play out. Now, I got to say one other thing. There may be high-level Democrats in these documents. There may be people who have been donors to Democratic Party campaigns. Do I care about that? No, I don't. In fact, my perspective on this, looks like the battery is going to die on my camera. Okay, I may have to switch over to another camera in a minute, you guys. Sorry about that. One of the challenges about this from the standpoint of where we sit is that we have to take the perspective that, people who do this to kids deserve to be prosecuted. And it doesn't matter what their political position is. It doesn't matter whether or not they are Democrats or Republicans. But I'm going to tell you, my perspective on this is that there's going to be a lot of GOP donors and Trump himself all over these documents in the event that they are released. Now, is this going to bring down Pam Bondi? Maybe. Is this going to bring down other people inside the DOJ? Possibly. Is it going to be the end of Kash Patel's service at the FBI? Perhaps. All of that is great, right? So we want to ride this one into the sunset. And that means, by the way, calling for the release of the files. All of them. All of them. Unredacted. Nothing left out. That's what we want. And, in the meantime, we'll have to see how MAGA handles this on an ongoing basis. But I don't really think there's any easy way out of this one, because this was such a foundational pillar of what Trump promised to do. And I am now going to switch my camera over. Hold on. Okay, now you've got me on the laptop computer. I'm going to move over. Okay, so in any event, I think we've got a fair amount of consideration here in terms of ways that we can use this for purposes of political leverage. And my recommendation on this is that everybody do everything that they can. Demand the release of the files, call your senators, call your MAGA House members and tell them you're really upset that the files haven't been released. Ask them what they're going to do about that. Tell them that you're not going to give them your vote if they don't get the Epstein files released. Okay, final thought on this, which I just need to say here because this is really important from the standpoint of where we go from here. I have to remind everybody that when you're in a cult, one of the only ways that you actually get out of a cult, your brain starts to repair itself, is by having this moment of cognitive dissonance where you realize you've been lied to. And that appears to be what's happening with huge chunks of the MAGA base and a bunch of the influencers. That means that there may be people in your own life who are waking up to the fact that Trump has lied to them. And that's an opportunity. You have to stay very well regulated around this, but that's an opportunity to start having conversations about the other ways in which Trump may have lied. Because once that seed of cognitive dissonance has been planted, that's an opening. Now, if you start having conversations with people who are in this place, you can't beat them over the head for not knowing any better sooner. Okay. We need everybody that we can get right now. And frankly, I think this is kind of a really weird moment where there could be an opportunity here to really transform the way in which his base operates in relation to like future elections. There could be like an abandonment of MAGA. And in fact, there are some people who are big time influencers on X right now who are like, I'm done with MAGA. This is it. It's over. I won't vote for any MAGA candidate ever again. If that starts to happen en masse, we're going to have a real opportunity to kind of like educate people about reality. And we need to be in a place where we can be like, yeah, I know it must be really disappointing. I really wanted him to release the Epstein files too. Are you aware, by the way, of what just happened in that bill that he was also lying about? Do you know that like they're actually cutting the healthcare for like 16 million people who really need it? And that like people are going to be kicked out of nursing homes? Again, that's just one example, but like there needs to be an opportunity here to really cultivate further discussion. All right. And it's a huge opportunity for all of us. Okay. A couple of other things we need to talk about today in terms of immigration. So a temporary restraining order, as we discussed last week, was granted to stop ICE in a class action format. Shout out to the class action lawyers. I was one for 7 years. In a class action format to stop ICE from racially profiling people in stops and from executing warrantless arrests in 7 counties, including Los Angeles County, okay, surrounding the court in California. Since then, the instances of ICE being spotted in the LA area have dropped by like 200%, okay? We're like 80 sightings over the weekend, like Sunday. Last week, it was at like 245, okay? Huge deal, huge decrease. That may mean, however, that resources are being allocated to other places like New York. There's been a lot of like ongoing stuff in New York and DC this morning, okay? One of the things that we have to remember here is that even though it's a temporary restraining order, that doesn't mean that it's going to expire. Somebody asked me a question about this on the Patreon feed this morning as well. Reminder, if you like what we're doing here, go become a paid subscriber for as little as $5 a month. It helps keep this work going and you get to ask questions. One of the things to keep in mind here is that a TRO is only the first stage of injunctive relief. It's an emergency form of injunctive relief that says you have to stop this right now because irreparable harm is being committed, okay? Then there is hearings conducted thereafter to put into place a preliminary injunction or a permanent injunction, which is a longer form of injunctive relief that says this is staying in place until we go to trial. Or, then you go to trial. Then the injunction becomes permanent. You cannot racially profile people and stop them on the street and black bag them because they're brown or they're speaking with a Latino accent of some kind, right? You can't do that, okay? So that in and of itself is, the TRO itself is just the beginning, all right? And by the way, I think we're going to see other efforts like this in other regions of the country to try to get similar relief on behalf of a class of targeted people in New York, in Boston, in Chicago, in other places where we know there's Philadelphia, where there's been a lot of ICE activity. Okay. Somebody asked a final question about recruitment for ICE because there have been ads running now on X to recruit new officers, I use that term loosely, for ICE since the murder budget passed, okay? And they're offering like $30,000, which is not much to do horrible things to your community. But in addition to that, I think we all have to understand that they are not training people. And this is really apparent in some of the ICE recordings that have come out in the last couple of days. These are people who don't know how to handle people refusing to do things that violate their rights. It's very clear that ICE is not training these people. They're just trying to get like bodies in the street to like black bag and kidnap people and deport them to third-party countries. So the expectation here, of course, is that the people who are signing up for these sorts of things are folks who are already in league with fascism. And that makes it all very dangerous. Now, I will repeat something that I've said from the very beginning of this administration. They need an enormous amount of manpower to carry out what they're trying to do. And they did not expect there to be community-based, let alone instantaneous community-based resistance to them raiding places of business, local farms, shelters, hospitals. These are all things that we've seen so far, right? This was not something that they didn't expect to have this kind of pushback. And I'm going to tell you that I think they're still going to have a problem recruiting people, because let's just keep in mind that no matter how social media makes it look, and no matter how much the mainstream media amplifies horror, the folks who are really like in deep league with the fascists, wanting to like rip people off the streets, kidnap them, black bag them, smash their windows, break their legs like an officer did running over somebody outside of a Home Depot in California this weekend, are very few and far between. And even in his base, they are a much smaller percentage of people than even the kind of like keyboard warriors that are out there. So we do have to take the threat as real. And I frankly will just tell you, I'm much more worried about things like Palantir and data collection as a means to identify people who are then specifically targeted than I am about like mass ICE agents roaming the streets, although we may get more of that as well. But from the standpoint of where we are right now, the real question is how they're going to use the money they've been given. And I'm not sure they're going to have all the people that they need. We'll see what happens with this. But I think the recruitment efforts are going to be tough. And there was also a piece in the New York Times last week, or maybe it was the Washington Post, which I'm not going to do the tiny violins thing about, but was kind of how I felt about it, which said that like morale is way down because they're not among ICE, because the people who were in it thought they were going to be arresting criminals. And what they're doing now is kidnapping grannies and, like hardworking farm workers and, people who are like mowing lawns. We're just like hardworking people raising their families, right? And that's not what some of these folks signed up for. So we're going to have to see how this all plays out. But, I think the concern, quote unquote, about whether or not they have the manpower is still legitimate. And that's one reason, by the way, why they're doubling down on big tech to try to nail people, like going through people's medical bills to try to figure out if they're undocumented and getting that data from like medical systems. And I mean, that's the place where I'm like deeply worried right now, in addition to kind of what we're seeing on the streets. So in any event, that's it for today's bonus broadcast. I am not here Tuesday or Thursday of this week for various reasons. Thursday, I'm speaking at a conference. Tomorrow, I have an unavoidable family conflict. So I'm not here Tuesday and Thursday, but I will be here at regular time on Wednesday and Friday. By the way, the third cohort of registration for the Dual Power Accelerator, our training program on how to build safety and security in your own community right now. Our third cohort starts on Friday. Registration for that closes at 9 a.m. on Friday morning. We have some of our alums here already in the chat who can tell you this is like an amazing program. We've trained 250 people so far. Great people signing up for this particular cohort. And all those folks will be with you in the program as well, because once you join, you get to do it over and over again. So if you would care to join us, the link for that is already below in the show notes. I will make sure it is also in the comments, and I will make sure that we drop a link above after the broadcast is over. But please join us for that. And don't forget to subscribe, to like this broadcast, to share it with your friends, to comment if you're watching after the fact. And please consider supporting this broadcast financially, either by joining this channel, by clicking join here, or by heading over to patreon.com/resistancelive and becoming a paid subscriber to ask questions and get bonus broadcasts. All right, y'all, I will see you all live on Wednesday. Have a good Monday. I'll catch you soon. All right, bye.